The Spook's Blood by Joseph Delaney. Read by Thomas Judd. The highest point in the county is marked by mystery. It is said that a man died there in a great storm while binding an evil that threatened the whole world. Then the ice came again, and when it retreated, even the shapes of the hills and the names of the towns in the valleys changed. Now, at that highest point on the fells, no trace remains of what was done so long ago, but its name is endured. They call it the Wardstone. Chapter 1. Time to Rebuild. The Spook was perched on a log in his garden at Chippenden, the sun singing through the trees and the air bright with birdsong. It was a warm spring morning in late May, as good as it got in the county. Things seemed to be changing for the better. I was sitting on the grass wolfing down my breakfast, and he was smiling to himself and looking quite contented for a change as he gazed back towards the house. From it came the sound of sawing. I could smell the sawdust. My master's house was being repaired, starting with the roof. It had been burned out by enemy soldiers, but now the war in the county was over, and it was time to rebuild and get on with our lives, as a spook and his apprentice dealing with all manner of things from the dark. Boggarts, ghosts, ghasts, and witches. I can't understand why Alice would leave like that without saying anything, I complained to the spook. It's not like her at all, especially as she knows we'll soon be setting off east and will be away for at least a couple of days. My friend Alice had disappeared 3 nights earlier. I'd been talking to her in the garden and had left briefly to tell the spook something, saying I'd be back in a few moments. On my return, she'd gone. At first I hadn't been too worried, but then she'd missed supper and hadn't reappeared since. The spook sighed.
Don't take this too hard, lad, but maybe she's gone for good. After all, you've been bound together for quite some time by the need to use that blood jar. Now she's free to do as she pleases, and she's a different person after being dragged off to the dark and held there for so long.
My master's words were harsh. Despite the fact that she'd been helping us for years, he still didn't trust Alice. She'd been born in Pendle and had spent 2 years being trained as a witch. John Gregory would be glad to see the back of her. When we were in Greece, Alice had created a blood jar to keep the Fiend at bay. Otherwise we'd have been both snatched away into the dark. Now it was no longer needed. We had bound the Fiend and cut off his head, which was now in the possession of Grimalkin, the witch assassin. She was on the run from his servants. Were the 2 halves of his body ever reunited, he'd be free again, and his vengeance would certainly be terrible. The consequences would be dire, not only for the county, but for the whole world beyond it. A new age of darkness would begin. But we had bought a little time in order to seek a way to destroy him permanently. My master's final words hurt me most of all. The Fiend had taken Alice off into the dark. On her return, she'd changed dramatically. Her hair had turned white. That was merely physical, but I feared that her soul had been damaged, that she'd moved closer to the dark. Alice had expressed that same concern. Maybe she would never return. Maybe she could no longer be close to a spook's apprentice. After 4 years of facing dangers together, we'd become close friends, and it saddened me that we were now drifting apart. I remembered something my dad had told me when I was younger. Although just an ordinary farmer, he'd been wise, and as I was growing up, he taught me lots of truths about life. Listen, Tom, he'd once said, you have to accept that in this world, things are constantly changing. Nothing stays the same forever. We have to learn to live with that. He was right. I'd been happy living at home with my family. Now Mum and Dad were both dead, and I could never go back to that life. I just hoped that my friendship with Alice wasn't coming to an end too. What sort of place is Todmorden? I asked, changing the subject. There was no point in arguing with my master about Alice.
Well, lad, my duties have never taken me to that town, but I do know a bit about it. Todmorden straddles the eastern county border, which is marked by the River Calder. So half the town is in the county, and half is beyond it. No doubt the folk across the river will have different customs and attitudes. We've travelled a bit.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?